A young child entered a Christmas party with her mother and was never seen leaving. 200 people were in that room. Nobody saw her leave. It was the kind of cold that gets into your coat before you even step outside. The sky over Lawton, Virginia had gone dark early, the way it does in December, and the parking lot of the Woodside apartment complex was spotted with frost. People were hurrying inside, blowing into their hands, calling out to neighbors across the lot. It was Christmas party night. Inside the clubhouse, it was warm and loud. Kids chasing each other between the folding chairs. Someone had put up a tree in the corner. There were plates of food on the tables, little gifts wrapped in tissue paper, the kind of evening that small communities pull together once a year and actually feel like a family. Tammy Brennan had come here because this was exactly the kind of community she'd been looking for. She was a single mum, an accountant, raising her only child at Woodside for the past 3 years. She knew her neighbors. She trusted the place. It felt safe. Her daughter Melissa was 5 years old, tiny, 3 feet tall, 48 pounds, dark blonde hair, blue eyes. Dressed that night in a pink parka, a red plaid skirt, and a blue sweater with Big Bird on the front. She was one of those children who stayed close to their mother at parties, didn't really wander, didn't go off with people she didn't know well. Shy, sweet, happy to just be next to Tammy. At some point near the end of the evening, Tammy stopped to say something to a friend. Just a few words, the kind of pause you don't even register. She turned back around. Melissa was gone. Your first thought, if you're being honest, is that kids disappear at parties all the time. They crawl under buffet tables. They fall asleep behind sofas. They find another kid in the hallway and forget everything else exists. So at first, nobody panicked. Officers checked the building. Volunteers spread out into the woods behind the complex, flashlights cutting through the dark. The temperature was dropping fast. A child without much protection wouldn't last long out there, and everyone knew it, so people moved quickly. But she wasn't in the woods. Forensic investigator Jim Goggin worked through the building carefully. There was only one main entrance, and it had been full of people the entire evening. But in the furnace room, down a hallway off the main party space, he found a window. It was open, wide enough for someone to pass a small child through. From there, footprints in the frost led away from the building toward a split rail fence. The top rail of the fence had been freshly broken. Beyond the fence, the tracks led into a small parking lot beside an abandoned building. And then they stopped. No child's footprints anywhere outside. Whoever left through that window had been carrying her. While officers were searching the woods, the interviews had already started. 200 guests, questioned one by one. A name began appearing in the answers. Caleb Hughes, the maintenance man for the Woodside complex. He had been at the party that night, wearing his work clothes among a room of people dressed for Christmas. A few residents knew him. Several women at the party had been approached by him that evening with comments that made them uncomfortable. Inappropriate, direct, the kind of thing you remember because it makes you want to leave the room. He had also spent a noticeable amount of time with the children at the party, playing games with them, interacting with them in ways that made parents uneasy without being able to say exactly why. He had spoken to Tammy about Melissa. At one point, he offered to take Melissa and a couple of other children out to a restaurant if they needed to go. Nobody had taken him up on it. When detectives tried to reach Hughes that night, he wasn't home. His wife said she didn't know where he was. He had left the party, but hadn't come back. 2.5 hours after Melissa vanished, he finally called police and met them at his house 4 miles away. Officers noticed immediately that he was wearing different clothes from what witnesses had described at the party. They checked the washing machine. His party clothes were inside, soaking. So were his shoes. So was his leather belt, which had an empty sheath attached to it. The weapon was missing. He had no explanation for the missing hours. He said he drove the long way home. He said the clothes were his work clothes, and he needed them clean for the next morning. Detective Bill Wilden brought him in for formal questioning. Hours of it. Hughes sat there and answered in ways that were just slightly off. He denied knowing who Melissa was. He said he had never seen the child. Police already knew that wasn't true. He had been at the same table with her. He had spoken to her mother about her. When Wilden pushed hard, Hughes looked at him steadily and said, "Prove it." Then he went home. His wife's car, which Hughes had been driving that night, was impounded the following morning. Goggin stood outside it and looked through the window before he even opened the door. It was a wreck inside. 2 large dogs rode in that car constantly, and it showed. Dirt, pet hair, debris ground into every surface. A vacuum cleaner would have pulled everything into one pile and destroyed the layering of the evidence. So he tried something he'd never done before on a case. He cut strips of masking tape and pressed them carefully along the interior surfaces, seat by seat, lifting fibers and hairs the way you'd lift a fingerprint. Then he sealed each strip between sheets of clear plastic so the layer stayed intact for examination. Nobody in his department had seen that technique used before. He just thought of it standing there in the cold, staring at that filthy car, trying to figure out what to do. Luminol testing on the interior indicated biological evidence on the steering wheel, the brake pedal, and the floor mat. When Hughes's shoes arrived from the house, they had been washed, but the soles still showed faint traces. And there was fresh damage in the rubber soles, deliberate cuts, right where the suspected blood traces were strongest. Why cut your own shoes? The FBI was brought in. Agent Doug Diedrich, a trace evidence examiner, received the tape samples and began working through them under the microscope, separating fibers by type, by color, by source. Dog hairs, human hairs, synthetic threads, dozens of them, then more, then something different. Among the debris, Diedrich found black animal hairs. He set them aside. He had also been sent Melissa's nightgown from her bedroom at home, along with her hairbrush and bedclothes, anything bearing traces of her. Working through the nightgown, he noticed hairs sticking out of the fabric, similar black hairs. He pulled both samples onto slides, put them under the microscope together. They were identical, dyed rabbit fur. Both samples showed the same distinctive corncob pattern texture at the microscopic level, which is how dyed rabbit fur looks up close. An exact match. He called the prosecutor immediately. Did Tammy Brennan own a rabbit fur coat? She did. She had worn it to the Christmas party. Her mother had bought it for her in Germany. It was dyed a bluish-black color, so rare it was practically unknown in the United States. Melissa had been close to the coat all evening, handling it at the party and at home. The chain was forming. The rabbit hairs had moved from the coat to Melissa, and from Melissa into the front passenger seat of Caleb Hughes's car. It wasn't proof of everything, but it was proof of something. Diedrich kept going. He had also identified blue acrylic fibers and red cotton fibers in the passenger seat. The colors roughly matched what Melissa had been wearing, but without an identical outfit to run comparisons against, the match couldn't be confirmed. Her Big Bird sweater and plaid skirt had been a special holiday item, sold once through the J.C. Penney Christmas catalog. Diedrich went home and mentioned it to his wife. She said if it had Big Bird on it, it came from J.C. Penney. She was almost certain she had an old catalogue. He found the picture, the exact outfit, right there in the pages. The FBI contacted J.C. Penney. The company searched its catalogue records and produced a list of every household that had ordered the item. Agents were sent out across the country to visit those families and find out if any of them still had the outfit stored somewhere. One family did. Diedrich remembered the day the package arrived. He had been working toward this moment for months, but as he held the box, something made him hesitate. The fibers in the car were purplish blue. The catalogue had listed the sweater as navy blue. If those weren't the same colour, the whole line of analysis could fall apart. He opened it. The sweater was purplish blue. Then he pulled fibers from the skirt and the sweater and ran them against the samples from the car. The blue acrylic yarns matched. The red cotton threads matched. The yellow cross threads from the plaid pattern matched. Every component of that outfit produced an identical result with what had been found in the passenger seat. Diedrich then ran 7,983 comparison tests. He collected 126 different navy and blue acrylic fibers from items all over the FBI building, anything he could find, coats and scarves and sweaters, and tested each one against the car fibers. One matched, out of nearly 8,000. The Big Bird outfit, and separately, buried deep in the tape samples from the passenger seat, was a single light blonde human hair, finer than everything around it. When it was compared to hairs from Melissa's brush at home, it was an exact match. 3 independent connections, all of them pointing to the same seat in the same car. The months after that were hard in a quiet way. Melissa's name had left the news by then. The yellow ribbons that had covered the trees around Woodside had faded and come down. Lawton had gone back to ordinary life. But Tammy Brennan was still in her apartment, still waiting, and the investigation was still running in the background. In January of 1990, a judge revoked Hughes's probation on an older auto theft charge and sent him to custody. It wasn't the charge anyone wanted, but it meant he was locked up while the lab work was completed, and that mattered more than it might seem. Then 2 months before the trial was scheduled to begin, police received a call. 2 counties over, authorities found unidentified remains on the median of Interstate 95. Detective Wilden and his partner drove out immediately. The section of highway was heavily wooded, the kind of place where you could pull over at night and disappear into the tree line without anyone seeing you. When they arrived, Wilden looked at the unidentified remains and knew almost immediately. It wasn't Melissa. The unidentified victim had rings on 3 fingers. The age was wrong. A young girl, 12 or 13 years old, who had been in that median through 2 growing seasons. She was never identified. They drove back without what they came for. Hughes was indicted on the most serious abduction-related charge available at the time. Not fatal case. Under Virginia law at the time, a charge tied to her death required proving where the death occurred, and without recovering the victim, that was impossible. At the time, prosecutors used the strongest felony charge available under Virginia law. He pleaded not convicted. The trial began on February 26, 1991. Prosecutor Robert Moran called his witnesses one by one. Women who had been at the party described Hughes's behavior that evening. Others placed him near Melissa in the minutes before she disappeared. The jury heard about the 2.5-hour gap, the washed clothes, the cut shoes, the missing knife, the biological evidence that the luminol had found and partially destroyed. Then Diedrich took the stand. He explained the rabbit hairs, the fiber tests, the 7,983 comparisons. He walked the jury through why the number mattered, what it said about the probability of those fibers appearing in that seat by coincidence. The defense said it was all circumstantial. Moran agreed. He told the jury directly that circumstantial evidence is still evidence, that it doesn't bend, that it doesn't change its story depending on who's asking. After 8 days and 9 hours of deliberation, the jury found Caleb Hughes guilty. He was sentenced to 50 years in custody. That sentence is still running. Melissa Brannen's remains were never recovered, not in the woods around Woodside, not along Interstate 95, not anywhere. Tammy eventually left the apartment. She had stayed as long as she could, but before she moved, she did one thing that still stays with you when you hear it. She kept the same phone number, the one Melissa had memorized, the one she would have dialed if she ever got lost or scared or needed to come home. Tammy kept it because she couldn't bring herself not to. There is no clean ending here. A man is in custody. A mother got a verdict, but not her daughter. And somewhere in Virginia, in a case that is technically closed, there is still a 5-year-old girl in a pink parka who hasn't been found. What the investigators did with a piece of masking tape and a J.C. Penney catalog and months of patience was extraordinary. They built a conviction without recovering the victim, without a statement of responsibility, without a single person who saw what happened. That almost never works. That time, it did. But it still wasn't everything. Cases like Melissa's don't stay in the news. They get replaced by the next story and the one after that. But for the families, they never move on. If this case meant something to you, it helps to pass it on. Not for algorithms, but because some stories shouldn't disappear just because the headlines do. And maybe the only lesson here is simple. Someone looked at a dirty car full of dog hair and decided to keep going anyway. That matters. That's the whole thing.